Good morning. This is Glenn Greenidge and Tom Pope, and today's our conversation is going to be about unions and specifically the police union. Is it a union? Is it a union different from other unions? So that'll be part of our discussion. So, Tom, what do you think is what
Well,
would you call a definition of a union? Let's start there first.
um, yes, we should probably give our ideas about what a union means. Uh, in my thinking, a union is a group of laborers who not only care about the working conditions in their own field, but are drawn to the plight of other workers in other fields so that we have a type of solidarity. We have this constant field of reaching out and bettering everyone. The entire community is everyone who is a worker somewhere. Um, the teacher is concerned, of course, with what's happening with tools that help her or him in the classroom, better the student, but also working conditions. But the teacher is also concerned about, is the janitor going to be taken care of? Is outside of the school, is the person down the street in the factory going to be recognized? So it's an all-encompassing feel and spirit of solidarity. How would you see unionism?
I would add also that it is to protect the workers, industry standards, the garment workers, for example. The union created better working conditions so that they weren't locked in case of a fire and so forth. That was a huge thing. You mentioned the teachers, and of course the teachers, work conditions, tools. Is it going to be clean? Is the space going to be, the bathrooms clean, the classrooms clean? And so the union has impacts in the environment, the working conditions, of course, salaries and pay structures and pay scales and so on and so forth. But there are also, for me, there's kind of like a societal impact, if you want to say, in terms of, there's a particular expectations, there's conduct that's expected of a teacher, of a janitor, of a garment worker. There's certain things that come with that particular industry, in addition to the basic concerns of safety and salary. And so I think the unions have been strong in this country, and they've developed to work certain types of people, classes of people. They've also been used to fend off other people from joining those unions and barring them from entering those unions as well. So the unions can be both supportive of the community and also restrictive.
Well, unionism basically has declined greatly over the past, since Reagan. And many workers have lost a lot of their rights since then. That does not seem to be affecting police unions.
No.
Now, the police unions actually, let's see, the Fraternal Order of Police, the largest union, has 340,000 members. Now, would you not think that they would be involved with other unions as well? It seems most of these people in the police unions um, rarely get in touch with other union issues. It's only their particular field. This is one of the major stumbling blocks I see if we start to talk about them as a real union. It doesn't seem to me that they are a real union.
So when you say a real union, so what are the aspects that you that specifically that you see are missing in terms of the
The
so,
concern for other workers. If you're going into a crowd of protesters who are talking about rights of workers in other industries, and if you're going to be the cop who uses a rubber bullet or tear gas um, against someone who is a worker, are you really part of a union movement?
interesting point. Yeah, yeah. I think that there's certainly been some separation from themselves, from other unions. For one, I think that that's part of this code blue that occurs. Um, so they're very protective of each other. And the interesting thing is, even when they've had bad experiences, they're still protective of each other, almost, I don't want to say to a fault, but it just seems like that's the number one rule, and that supersedes anything, even when you've got individuals who are badly behaving or behaving outside of what is quote unquote the norm. Um, that you would still stand up for them, protect them, and allow them to kind of go off and not be disciplined and not be, and it's okay. And I think that that's been part of the issue nationwide that we've been bumping up against.
As you talk about that, let's look at the reverse. In other fields, a person who is complaining about sexual harassment can be let go just because she's asking or demanding an inquiry. Her rights aren't being listened to. Um, we have examples of people who are whistleblowers and their rights are not being listened to. But if you're a perpetrator in a police union, you probably will not face any type of retribution.
And even when bad display has been highlighted and brought to the attention of the public, you're still retiring with your full pension and what have you. So it's almost like there's no retribution. There's no consequences for the bad behavior. And I think now what we're seeing is a shift in that. And I think that the shift will cause some reform within the quote unquote code blue impact. And I want to say this: being a police officer is not an easy job. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of um, emotional things that you have to deal with. Um, and you also have to be able to separate your personal life from your active police life, which in some cases could be quite difficult. And we've seen the suicide rates of police officers skyrocket, just not being able to deal with it. So there's something to be said about the dangerous piece, but then you also want to be careful not to condone the bad behavior that without any consequences. So there's some, and I don't know that any other union really deals with that aspect, those aspects of the job.
Well, as part of this conversation, I think you're highlighting also a very different perspective, dividing police unions from other unions. With the police, you have the general officer has control over the life and death of someone else. Whereas in most other unions, you don't have that.
No, that's true.
You have a direct authority figure versus in other unions, you're subservient to the employer. When we look at this, this also leads to the general conservatism of how the police unions look at what they protect without going for changes. That's not the heart of unionism. The heart of unionism embraces changes. It embraces how do we make something better. I think there's a clear distinction right there showing police unions are not part of the union movement.
Yeah, yeah, I would have to absolutely agree with you. I would also add the whole militarization of the police force as another aspect of it that emboldens, empowers them to be not a regular union. And you pointed to it is this power of the power of policing. You're determining life and death situations in the moment. And I don't know that you're always equipped, because let's say there's a mental health issue, force is not going to deal with that mental health issue. You need someone who can de-escalate, who can understand the emotional aspects of what's going on. So maybe we're asking too much.
When the teachers union in Chicago won a recent strike, part of the demand was to have extra mental health counselors to work with students. You have never, ever heard a similar request by police to help themselves in this area.
No. In fact, yeah. In fact, well, actually, I've heard of one initiative that people are looking to do, and I keep getting it wrong. It's PSTD, the syndrome that you come back from war, and to have that treatment available for police officers, because they're in a similar stressful.
They are. The problem, though, is for the average officer to seek out that counseling, which would be beneficial, that requires the officer to have an idea that this is necessary.
Well,
and that shows a weakness in the minds of some people.
yes, and that whole self-reflection, I think, is part of what is not occurring, because people aren't asking for help. People aren't asking to have social folks come out with them to be part of the call to interact with the community.
It's interesting. The Writers Guild of America, another trade union, has recently called for the removal of the International Union of Police Associations from the AFL. Now, yes, police unions are part of the AFL. Unfortunately, that was rebuffed by the AFL. But we do have some unions that recognize Police unions have no place as a union.
Interesting.
Um, but this is an interesting part of the conversation, I think. When we hear certain criticism that Democrats should not be asking for the end of police unions, it's going to hurt the labor movement. I would say, actually, it would be beneficial for the labor movement because the labor movement has nothing in common with police unions.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is interesting, though, that the history does, let's see, the history of the police union with the AFL goes back to 1919,
Wow.
the famous Boston police strike. Now, there was a time when the Boston Social Club and the police department wanted to become a union, and they were able to do so, and that created a problem with the city administrators. But one of the reasons they were fighting then, here are some interesting figures. The new recruit would make $730 the first year. It's a lot of money, right?
Right.
Uh,
Huge.
6 years later, he'd make $1,400 a year.
She is lady, double her salary. Wow.
But he's responsible for buying his own uniforms. They cost about $200 a year.
Oh, wow.
He could go to work as a carpenter and make twice that. Let's see. Oh, the all right. Well, you could make a case that at that moment, the police union was very similar to other unions, and they were being supported in that strike by other unions. However, we're dealing, I think, with a different time. Since 1954, when the police unions organized themselves, they're asking for almost total immunity for any type of crime that is being done by an officer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and I certainly think that that's a turning point. One of the other things that I'll bring up that I found quite interesting is that New York City police are probably one of the highest compensated in the country, if not in the world. I was in New Orleans maybe 10, 12 years ago, 15 years ago. And I was shocked to find out that the police salary was barely 30,000, 35,000, 40,000 was the top money. And so what that did was that had the police go out and look for side jobs. So they would assist people in parades with the motorcycles. They would, obviously do security details and so on and so forth. So there's something about being fully compensated as well, so that you're not required to do a lot of other things. And of course, one of the problems with the New Orleans Police Department was that they were, doing a lot of illegal crime because to subsidize their pay. So so it's interesting to see the characteristics of it shift depending on the pay and so forth, and of course the regions that they're operating in that are maybe a little bit more sleepy or different dynamics at least, and all of that comes into play as well. It's interesting. It's an interesting conversation.
Um, in closing, what are your thoughts about where do we go from here?
Well, I think that one of the things that we certainly have to come into play with is um, reform, police reform. There's a call. There's a call for more transparency, and there's a asking for more information to be disclosed. In fact, I was at a community board meeting, and one of the things that we were looking at was asking the public advocate to be able to work with the um, OLR, the Labor Relations Board that actually works with the contract, to be able to put in some things to create some transparency for the community, so that we could actually um, come up with a letter grade. Well, how's the police department doing? Do they get an A, B, or C? And in the certain areas of violent crime or excessive force or whatever you, so that you can begin to track that and actually create some incentives, because we as a community would certainly want them to be incentivized to be able to do better and to move forward and to kind of track it. So we'll see. This is a new.
That's addressing the overall issue of reform.
Right.
What about where do we go from here in terms of how do we see the police unions as being part of the general idea of a union?
It's going to take a bit. It's going to. I think the reform is probably the place to start that conversation. But out of the reform, will create some synergies that I think might bring it back closer to the other unions. And I think that that's something that that with this concept of community policing could be the start of bringing that union back to other unions, as well as impacting and forcing the interaction with the community. So that's what I
Well,
see.
it's been a pleasure once again, and we are asking everyone, if you enjoy what you're seeing, go to www.facebook.com/community and social change to let us know your thoughts on the issues.
Thank you.